again, thank you so much for joining me. First question is just going to be, it feels like we could go in a billion directions with the Chiefs at 32. I've kind of learned over the years, don't believe a single thing you see outside once we're inside of like 2 weeks before the draft. But kind of where do you feel like we're at right now with the Chiefs in pick 32?
32 is the toughest spot because you're absolutely right. There are a myriad of directions you can go. It all depends on how the picks before you fall. We've seen them jump up when somebody falls that they like. Really happy that Trent McDuffie's in town at this point. We've seen them have to stick and pick with Felix, who I do think is going to have an accentuated role this coming season. I think we're going to see development there. And we've seen them trade back at times. Maybe not as often as rumored, but it's definitely any direction that they can go. I think the interesting thing, and you're right, you can't believe anything out of anywhere near Arrowhead One at this time of year, but it all comes down to who's there that Brett Veach and the staff like. And if he's not there, how do they react to that? So that's the thing. I think it's going to come down to who's on the clock when on Thursday night.
And when you said like, yeah, trading back, last time they did that would have been Chris Jones, right, in 2016. Because other than that, they traded away draft picks for a few years.
Yep.
But I mean, it seemed to work out the last time because they probably got a Hall of Famer. When it comes to 32 prospects wise, it feels like everyone's leaning towards wide receiver because there's obviously that need. Left tackle, maybe. Where are you kind of leaning right now, and who do you think would be the best fit?
I focused most of the draft cycle on those two position groups because they are the clearest needs on this roster. And especially with the return of Mike Dana kind of rounding out the entire D-line being back in full rotation, I think that's one that I had been leaning towards. But the closer we get to draft night, the more I feel like it's either a trade up, most likely for a left tackle type, or at least an offensive tackle you feel can swing either side, rather than the wide receiver, because the depth is just there so deep in this draft. They feel they can add to their room in the second, third, and maybe even fourth rounds.
So let's break it down. Who are some of these prospects you would like for them to maybe trade up for, or maybe end up taking at 32?
There's really only two guys.
Okay.
There's the legacy, the heartstrings that you want to go get Joe Alt, right? That's going to take so much draft capital that I see that as a very, very, very distant, infinitesimal option. The guy that I like nearly as much, because I think he can do everything, and I think he's a nastier version of Eric Fisher when he came to the team, is Troy Fautano from Washington. I think he's somebody you can get in the teens somewhere, probably early, but it looks like maybe in the last few days it's gotten a little bit deeper. And I think he can do everything for you. He's got the length to play left tackle, and I really like the way that he does it. And I think especially in the zone run, in the screen game, he's going to be excellent for Andy Reid's offense. But if they don't like it, instead of having to be stuck at tackle, they can easily move him inside with a couple of changes coming possibly to both guard positions in the next 3 years. There's that fallback position. So I think he's a can't miss prospect in terms of his fit and wherever you're going to have to put him on the field.
If they end up staying at 32 and they go tackle, now I feel like I'm starting to push agendas. My viewers might be starting to get annoyed with me. I am waving the Kingsley Suamatea flag. I love him as a prospect. How do you think about him? And then who are some of those other guys, that the Tyler Guytons of the world and that kind of tier of these tackles? Where do you kind of feel like those guys kind of fit in?
You nailed the two that are there that I think are probably the peak of that subgroup. I haven't broken down into tiers, and they're in the same tier for me, and they're right below the Talif Fuagas and the JC Lathams. It's Guyton and Suamati that I think are tight. And either one, I think Kingsley gives you a higher floor, I think. I do feel that Tyler Guyton gives you a higher ceiling. And that's just because of his athleticism and the way that he can grow in with Andy Heck and Andy Reid and get into it. But I will say this. There's also a case to be made for a guy who's been rising as of late, and I do feel is worth a fringe 70 to 60 pick, and that's Roger Rotengarten, who played on the right side at Washington, opposite Troy Fautano, but they feel could maybe move over to the left and certainly can move into guard. And I think, again, similar situation, a guy that didn't perform as well in the national championship game, but other than that, looked like a guy you could plug in at right, move Jawan Taylor over to left, and just roll.
That's an interesting thing that you just brought up, because that was the original plan when they brought in Taylor, was that he was going to go to left tackle. Do you think there's a chance that we could end up seeing that? I mean, I do feel like we're kind of almost giving up on Wanye a little early because it feels like we always love to give patience to third round picks and stuff, except for Wanye Morris, and people are like, replace, let's find someone else. But do you feel like that's a chance where they could move Jawan over to left?
I think they're going to put the best 5 guys on the field. I think Wanye's in that mix, but I think Wanye's. I don't think it's exactly to your point, but I do think the Wanye is feeling a little bit of the Lucas Niang hangover here, and so maybe it just needs a little bit more time. I thought he put some good things on tape last season. The question is, can he win that battle? And if Wanye Morris ends up your swing tackle, backing up both sides, and eventually becomes the Nick Allegretti that we're looking for, I think everybody comes away happy, and you're rolling towards another championship.
Is Niang's not on the roster anymore, is he? Or is he still out there?
He is currently and could be in play again this season one more time, right?
Yeah, no, that would be interesting as well. That would I've been saying that like I feel like Chiefs fans, if there's let's say Worthy, Mitchell, and like Keon Coleman are all available there at 32, and the Chiefs go tackle. My joke is Kansas City might burn that night because that's how badly the fan base wants wide receiver. But do you feel like it's as big of a need as maybe left tackle? Because it feels like it's pretty even right now. But which one are you kind of leaning on being more of a need?
It's hard not to get caught up in it emotionally, picturing drops from last season, picturing Patrick just looking and shouting for somebody to get open, right? But let's take a step back. Given all those circumstances, they still won a Super Bowl. I think it's absolutely more important to protect Patrick better than we've seen the last 2 seasons than it is to give him another target, especially when you know that you can get a guy in the 3rd round this year that you would have spent a pick very similar to where Sky Moore was selected and where Rashee Rice was selected in previous years. So I feel the value's there for where the Chiefs like to pick. So it is clearly for me offensive tackle.
Okay, no, I like that a lot. Plus, we've got future All Pro Nico Remigio in the wide receiver room too. I saw him because I always go up to training camp. I try to get up to training camp for like first day before pads and then the first day of pads. That way I can kind of see how they work for both of them. And Nico really stuck out to me during that period. How do you feel like about the wide receiver room right now when it's Justin Ross, you still got Sky, KT. We don't know how long Rasheed is going to be gone. Where do you feel like that wide receiver room is right now?
I feel like it's overflowing, to tell you the truth, because you're absolutely right about Nico. And obviously, Justin Ross still has a ton of upside that hopefully they can unlock. But this is the problem that I see right now is they are floating around trying to find a wide receiver one. They'd hope that that's going to be Rasheed. Maybe it still will be. We'll see what the development is pulled back here this next season. But there's still a room full of 2s and 3s. And I think they need an alpha number one, break it down, take it to the house every time kind of guy. And so that is kind of the need. If that is Rasheed, fine, then you can go get another guy you feel has high wide receiver 2 upside and go that way. But if not, you have to be scouring every option here, whether it's trade on draft night or something else, to try to go get you weapon number 1.
Are you a little nervous that they think that alpha might be Hollywood Brown?
I am slightly. I
Yeah.
think he can be that alpha for 24. I think that's going to determine how much investment it becomes for 25 and 6 and 7. And that's where I get a little bit more nervous.
Yeah, for sure. Let's talk. I know you dive deep into this. How many athletes, how many prospects do you scout and grade throughout this entire process?
I can't take credit for all of it. I have a great team behind me, but we have watched films, scouted guys in the 320 range, and I have numbers in terms of analytics and production on another 500-ish type prospects.
That's wild. That is incredible that you guys have that much. Who is kind of I know with like Arrowhead Pride and then they always called them like lottery tickets and stuff, but just those guys who are real late picks who could end up making an impact. Kind of who is on that kind of tier for you where they're really under the radar, they could go pretty late, but you really like what they could do at the next level, and especially in Kansas City.
I really like a couple of guys that unfortunately wouldn't be able to participate just because of the offensive line status right now. So we'll leave them out. But in terms of the pass catchers in particular, it goes very deep. If you want a chain mover, if you want a guy that's going to pull like a Willie Snead type for me, there's 2 guys that stand out in local guy. I do like throwing those out. And Ryan Flournoy, I like the game that he brings. I think he's got development ahead of him, as well as Jordan Whittington from Texas. Underrated, hasn't been able to participate in the draft process, but he just moved the sticks for the Longhorns. And I think that's something that is underrated in Kansas City because we're used to the big plays. But if they start moving forward towards the deep ball again, Hollywoods, and trying to push that, you got to have somebody who can be the safety valve. And I really like him in that role. That's probably my two standout sleepers for wide receivers.
So Whittington, if I'm thinking right, so before I worked here in Wichita, I'm from Paola, Kansas, like a little bit south of the Kansas City metro, but I'm in Wichita now. But before here, I was out in Amarillo, Texas, so like West Texas high school football. It's God out there pretty much. So I remember, I think Whittington went to Cisco High School, which is a pretty small. I think it's like a 3A school out in Texas, and it was just like when you get down to that level, if you have a legitimate, like, Texas Longhorn athlete at that level, like it's just game over. And I think I remember watching him in high school just light it up at the state championship game. So he would be a lot of fun as well. Is there anything defensively that you're kind of leaning towards, whether it's corner, or do you think maybe they could get maybe some safety help, or where do you feel like this team kind of could use some help on that side?
I think the lines between safety and corner in this particular class are very blurry. Some of the best safety prospects are converted corners on my board that I do feel have to make that move. So I'm not as high on either of those. There's some good fits. I do like the length that Kyrie Jackson brings from Oregon. I do like the tenacity that Renardo Green brings from Florida State. Nobody's really the perfect fit, though. And so if we're looking for the next L'Jarius Sneed, it's a tall, tall order, right? But they're out there. And so there's some options that I think that they'll look at, not necessarily in those position groups. I like the linebacker group late on day 3 with Jalen Ford, Olodosio from Washington, Tyron Hopper from Mizzou. A lot of athletic guys that can fill in that role with Willie Gay gone. Everybody's stepping up, right? I expect Cam Jones to have a good season, but who fills in behind Jack Cochran and Christensen, and who's the next role player? I like that as well. And I do feel like the defensive tackle group late has a lot of upside. And I think Joe Cullen agrees with me. One guy that he's been spending time with, or has in this process, is the other tackle from FSU in Fabian Lovett, who's got the longest arms in this defensive tackle class. And I think that's something they really like. And he's another sleeper I like.
If I put you on the clock as Chiefs GM, what do you think happens Thursday? Are you going to trade up? Are you going to stay at 32? Kind of what would you do if you were Brett Beach?
I think the groundwork's already been laid for it right now. The calls have been made. There's a couple of people that are willing to talk to the Chiefs. I don't think it's a lot of the league, but a couple of NFC teams that I think that there's a possibility. If they don't have a guy on the board that they really, really like, I think getting to 22 with Howie Roseman and the Philadelphia Eagles is a possibility. And I think that's a good spot for a faller for what the rest of the league sees that the Chiefs really, really like, much like with the Trent McDuffie trade up. I see that as probably the outside possibility. I'd love to see someone else scramble like the Vikings that are looking for a quarterback, and maybe they trade out. Rumors today about the Arizona Cardinals being willing to move out. They could do that a couple of times. If the Chiefs can get to the teens, I think they can get the tackle that I want to see in Kansas City, and probably the one that they do as well.
But do you feel like this is one of those things where wide receiver, while it is a need and they do need it, is there going to be that playmaker that really could take over that alpha role at 32 or even at 22, like you were saying?
I think the problem is that 22, 32, you're getting into the third tier of wide receivers in this group, because my top 4 will be long gone. The top 3 plus Brian Thomas is the way that I have it ranked. And I do think that that's done before 20. So anything after that is more risk and, quite frankly, more of a tighter evaluation, X to Y exactly. So why not take the tackle you need and find the guy that gives you the fit that you feel you can get that upside from, like an Xavier Legette, Keon, any of those guys I think could come in and do something as long as they get the coaching they need.
For sure. I guess my final question is going back to how you were talking about trading. Did you ever think we were going to be here, man, where teams didn't want to trade with the Chiefs? Like, I mean, I know you've been covering them for a very long time. I remember my senior year of high school was 2012. So, like, I remember going through everything that was. And then to just see this whole last 11 years of how it's been, like, did you ever think it was going to get to the point where the Steelers are like, no, we're not trading you Deontay Johnson?
No, it's been such a ride from the Glenn Dorsey picks and the night Eric Fisher went, and those years to get to this evolution. Kudos to everyone who's helped along the way, but it goes back to Clark having the foresight to bring in Andy Reid, and not just Andy, but everything that comes with Andy Reid, to reset the whole foundation. And yes, it took a bit, but you got going. Alex Smith was key and fundamental to these championships. And I think sometimes we forget him as well in setting the whole thing up to get to this point. And it takes all those things. It's like lightning in a bottle twice, but that's the formula that has worked here. And hopefully they can just keep the strikes coming.
For sure. All right. And fans, it's hard to please fans no matter what. If you do you have like a one message to Chiefs Kingdom, like let's say a player gets taken by the Chiefs at 32 or they trade up and it's someone that they didn't want. What would kind of your message to Chiefs Kingdom be just as they're going to go over this and they're going to overanalyze these draft picks for the next 4 months until training camp?
The bottom line is whoever ends up in Kansas City is going to have a coaching staff that's produced championships. And whatever you think of exposition group or position coach, they're going to get the full staff's attention. They're going to have a chance to take them back to another Super Bowl. And that's what it all comes down to. It may take a little while longer than we like, but I think you have to trust the system, trust Andy Reid, and understand that the quarterback fixes a lot of glaring holes, and you're going to be able to get there.
For sure. Okay, I got to give you a chance. I know you got the draft guide and everything. Kind of go ahead and push whatever you kind of want to for this because I know you're doing a lot of work right
now. I appreciate that. The best place to get information is at rogueapc.com. You can get the draft guide and the athletic matrix and all that. We run down all the content at NFL33.com as well as rgrfootball.com. You can always listen on Locked On Chiefs. That's a daily podcast.